Hi everyone. Welcome to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Premier with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this section, in this show, we're going to talk about the annual survey where the council asks the residents what your opinion is, and then we're going to move on to the COVID recovery fund. So the Tower Hamlets Council is putting about 3 million aside for COVID recovery. And then we're going to look into the council's 1,000 council homes program. I know the target's moved to 2,000. We're going to look into the details of that. And then on the final section, we're going to talk about two big housing associations which have a massive impact in Tower Hamlets. There's Spitalfields Housing Association, which is some of its activities. And then you got One Housing merging with Riverside, and One Housing has a lot of stock, especially in the Isle of Dogs, and there are some bits in Mile End Ward as well. So we're going to go shortly. Oops. Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Premier with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this section, we're going to talk about Tower Hamlets Council's annual survey. So once a year, Tower Hamlets Council makes an effort to ask residents what they want or what are their concerns. Andrew's had a look at it. Andrew, has there been any changes this year to the annual survey? It seems like the same issues pop up over and over again, but they've done it differently because of COVID. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, the results are actually pretty similar to previous years. And what they normally do is they send people out. They they employ a company to do the work. And these people go out into various places in Tower Hamlets, and they basically try and talk to about 1,100 people across Tower Hamlets. And they then try and sort of make sure that those people are representative of Tower Hamlets. They couldn't do it this time, or last year, I should say. So the whole thing was delayed until February, March. And what they ended up doing was calling 446 people on their landlines, and then 662 people on mobile phones. And then there's kind of like detail to kind of make sure that, you know, those 1,100 people are kind of reflective of the wider society. And that, you know, it was pretty close in terms of sort of the mix, in terms of age groups, male, female, and all the rest of it. And what was very interesting is actually the results were pretty similar to previous years. They didn't ask all of the questions they normally do because it's apparently harder to do this over the phone. But as an example, like the top three concerns last time are the same top three concerns this time. So, for example, you know, when people were asked to rank like their sort of top three concerns, the top three concerns for most people were crime and antisocial behavior, 47%, and that number has been rising every year. Lack of affordable housing, 36%, and again, that's been the top two issue for years. And then the third issue was kind of litter and dirt on the streets, and a number of homeless people, 20%, level of council tax, 19%, not enough being done for young people, 19%, traffic congestion, 17%, and then level of air pollution, 16%. So those were kind of like the top issues, whereas things like poor public transport was pretty much the lowest of the concerns that people had. And then also there was sort of like some more analysis of council services. And then there was some interesting results. So for example, they asked a question, my council keeps residents informed about what they are doing. So 67% of people said yes, that the council do keep them informed, and 30% have disagreed with that. But then they also asked a very similar question later on, which is the council is open and transparent about its activities, and only 39% agreed with that, and 29% disagreed. So depending on how you word the question, you were getting quite different answers. But to be fair, the overall results were fairly positive. My council is efficient and well run, 56% agreed. But then also my council is difficult to get through to on the phone, 59% agreed of that. So some of this stuff we can recognize, and some of it wasn't bad for the council. So you can definitely pick some things from there which are good, and some things which are not so good.
Yeah, I think with the contradiction, I think there's a slightly nuance. I think what it is the trust level between residents and the council is quite low. So the council, that's what I found. The council would say something, but people would question it. And they go, is that really the truth? And sometimes you just dissect it, and it's not exactly the whole truth. So a good example is the laptop issue. Who provided the laptop and how many were provided by whom? And it was kind of interesting, the discussion on social media about that. So I think there's a lot of spin from the council, and I think a lot of residents there's a disjoint between their experience and what the council says, and you see the same thing in various areas, like for example, bricklaying. The council says, "Oh, it's how everything is." Talk to traders, they say, "No, it's not. It's terrible. Things could be better." So it is that lack of trust. But that's how I would kind of interpret it. But again, we need to get better questions out there to actually get to how residents feel. But it's kind of interesting that crime and antisocial behavior is going up, because when I first came across the survey, that was number 2, and now it's become number 1, and it's going higher and higher and higher. And you hear that on the doorstep as well.
Yeah.
Why is that? Is it when I spoke to people close to the administration, they claim that it's people's perception kind of ish. It's all in the mind, or people being influenced by the right winger. I don't know what that means nowadays. But what's your analysis of that? Is it really going up? Is people's perception of crime going up?
Well, the police have confirmed that certainly antisocial behaviour definitely is going up. And one of the problems with the question is I don't think it differentiates enough between crime and antisocial behaviour. So I suspect a lot of the answers are more to do with antisocial behaviour. But there again, we've had concerns about knife crime and involving children as well. And I remember a cabinet meeting in, I think it was 2017. And I don't know why it came up, and I think it was kind of before the meeting started or during the meeting, and it was talking about antisocial behaviour. And actually a lot of cabinet members were saying how they were personally impacted in their personal lives about antisocial behaviour where they actually lived in Tower Hamlets. And I thought that was a really fascinating kind of conversation, which unfortunately I think was ended when the agenda moved on to the next item, that actually cabinet members themselves were complaining about their experiences with antisocial behaviour. And it definitely has increased over the years in terms of prominence in the surveys. If I go back to some of the previous years, as you said, it was number 2, and it basically just keeps increasing every year. And that does match the police reports for antisocial behaviour. I think crime is a little bit harder to tell. I think fear of crime is definitely still very high. And I need to do some more work looking at some of the police stats as to whether that's reality or perception, or whether that's social media, because I know certainly on the Isle of Dogs, people are much more aware of crime now because it's reported on social media, on Facebook, in a way that wouldn't have happened perhaps 10 years ago. So yeah, I think, and that's maybe where it would be useful to do more analysis, would be to break down the concerns between antisocial behaviour and the crime part of it. So
the other one I'm surprised with is air pollution, because it's going down overall, and you could actually feel it. Like I myself, I'm mildly asthmatic. This year, I didn't need an inhaler, so I hadn't had use of the inhaler for about 2 years now. So again, is that perception or reality kind of ish. It's kind of interesting that what people perceive and what is actually happening.
Well, if you actually look at the air quality statistics from our own collection stations, air quality has been improving in most parts of Tower Hamlets for a number of years now. There are some exceptions, but generally the trend is improving. And I kind of feel the same way, because sometimes you can almost like taste or feel pollution in the air. And I still occasionally do, when a particularly dirty bus passes by, but I don't smell it as much as I used to. But again, it depends on very much on where you are as well. So
what happens with this survey, Andrew? I know we do it every year. Does it probably be discussed at the cabinet? Is ONS going to pick it up? Are you over in scrutiny? Because cabinet is next Wednesday, so you're going to have an over in scrutiny on Monday. Is that one of the agenda? And what is it you're going to be focusing on that?
Well, it feeds through into kind of the strategic plan monitoring, so how the council monitors its own performance, and this is an important part of it because this is directly from residents. But before I talk about that, there's just a couple of other points to mention from the survey, which I thought were really interesting. So people were asked whether they felt lonely some of the time, or often or always. And 24% of the people who responded said they felt lonely on a often or always, which I thought was interesting. The other one, which is very interesting, is access to the internet. So again, of the 1,108 people surveyed, 95% had access to the internet, but 92% at home, 95% overall. So maybe some people access at work. And 94% have got an email address, which I thought was also interesting, because again, it kind of backs up the argument that actually sort of internet access is actually pretty high in Tower Hamlets. If you look at the households as a whole, I'm not saying every person in the household has got internet access, but certainly of the people who are interviewed. And again, there is a reminder, this was done over the phone, and it would be done in English as well. So that's an important point just to make, is of those people who were interviewed, internet access was 95%. So again, that's something that needs a bit of drilling down on.
It's kind of interesting, loneliness, that's come up on the survey, because the councils more or less closed all the luncheon clubs, sort of ish. And the luncheon clubs, for listeners and viewers who don't know, so luncheon club is where people come together to have subsidized food, but it's a way of getting people who live on their own to meet other people and socialize over a meal. And the way it came about is actually from a public health angle, where loneliness actually causes causes deterioration in people's health, etc. And one of the ways of mitigating is to have luncheon clubs where people socialize, etc. They mentally feel much better. They're part of a network. They're part of a support network, etc. And recently, Tower Hamlets councils more or less closed all their luncheon clubs. So it used to be a massive feature in community work. You talk to old community activists. Many of them got active through luncheon clubs or setting up luncheon clubs. Now we don't have any of them in the borough, and it's kind of interesting that loneliness has come up. I know Councillor Denise Jones is advising the mayor on this issue. She's on the Health and Wellbeing Board. Is that something you're going to pick up on ONS? Are you, etc. Andrew?
Yes, I mean there's annual strategic report. So it's called a strategic performance and delivery annual report, and that's going to cabinet on Wednesday. And it's got a bunch of analysis about how the council are doing. So it includes this survey plus many other things, for example, recycling rates and percentage of the workforce that are off ill, and a whole bunch of other things. And some are green, which is we're performing on target. Some are red or amber. So, for example, councillor staff sickness absence rates has always been a big problem for us, and again, it's looking bad. So this will be part of an overall thing that we're looking at as to how the council is performing, and this is obviously an important part of the evidence base, which is what residents themselves are saying about the council.
Well, in terms of council performance, I know there's a strike ballot coming up with Unison. So I guess that's a survey of workers, how workers feel working for Tower Hamlets Council. So it's not looking good. I know it's going to be at the end of this month. I saw like a tweet. So it'd be interesting to see how the council judges its strategic review in terms of performance when the people working at the council feel aggrieved. But that's something for another show because it's going to be an ongoing development. So we're going to go straight into a break. After the break, we're going to go into the COVID Recovery Fund, or the Mayor's COVID Recovery Fund. I'm not sure whether they've finalized on what the title is going to be, but we're going to go straight into a break. And after the break, we're going to talk about the £3 million or near £3 million that the Tower Hamlets Council is going to hand out in terms of COVID recovery fund. So we're going to go straight into
the valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday. And what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. What am I saving or investing for? Why am I doing it? When will I need the money? And how much money do I need? Yeah. So that's quite important, because when you're looking at your net worth, you've got to start with saying, well, what do I want my net worth to be, so that there's a goal, and then work backwards. How do I get there? And if I can start with £50 or $50 a week, if I save that every week, and you can go online and use calculators online. I don't have to teach you the maths behind it, but you can say, okay, and if I get a 3% return and I put this away for how long will it take to reach my goal? And that's called just this basic cash flow projection calculations. And it's what we use in financial planning all the time. What we say to clients is we say, okay, what is your goal? What is your objective? Where do you want to go to? And we discuss that in a lot of detail and over most of the meeting. And then the rest of it is saying, okay, in your exact circumstances, with your risk profile, with how you feel about.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Premier with co-host Councillor Andrew Ridge. So in this section, we're gonna discuss the COVID Recovery Fund. So, and Andrew, you've been looking into it. We as Labour councillors had a sneak preview, so to speak, of this. I don't know whether they were finalised on the title. When they were talking to us, they were still quivering over the title. I don't know. It's called the Mayor's Recovery Fund, COVID Recovery Fund, or the COVID Recovery Fund. But what's your take on this £2.9 million giveaway, sort of ish?
So it's actually called the Mayor's COVID Recovery Fund.
Okay.
Projects. I think that's on the. It's actually broken into two parts. There's I think £590,000 that's already been agreed and will happen, and then there is £2.4 million which is meant to be agreed on Wednesday in the next cabinet meeting. So the earlier stuff is the stuff that needed to happen in advance for summer. So that includes, I won't read out the whole list, but for example, £44,000 for marking the pandemic, some kind of live event, memorial service with some tree planting, but also £322,000 for a range of sort of children's activities, of mainly sports related. And then the other one, it's a whole, I think the technical term is, you might not have heard this word, is smorgasbord. So it's like a big bunch of stuff all kind of thrown together. And some of it makes absolute sense, and some of it I'm not entirely sure why it's in a COVID recovery fund. So, for example, establish a network of membership-based food pantries, £100,000, which I think, that kind of fits. There's stuff about COVID volunteer hub, which definitely does fit into a COVID recovery, 75,000. But then what I found really odd is community high streets, deep clean renewal and improvement. So kind of cleaning the streets, £267,000 is to do with COVID recovery. And that one I wasn't entirely convinced by. But yes, it's a lot of money, and it's being paid for out of new homes bonus, which is money that we get from government for approving big new developments. So again, a lot of this money would come from those areas of Tower Hamlets, which is sort of seeing the most development, because the government give us cash as a sort of bribe, or whatever you want to call it, for approving these developments. So it's very closely linked to the delivery of new homes. And we get a lot of money each year. I think it's £19 million this coming year, of which £3 million will be spent on these COVID projects. What we don't know is how much money is left from the other government money that was given to us, because I'm pretty sure we ended last year with a surplus, and this year we were going to get additional money from government for COVID. So that's the other thing we're going to try and find out, is what happened to the rest of the money. But yeah, certainly there's a lot of money for market traders, for charities, mental health casework support. So it'd be interesting to see how that's all spent and whether people sort of notice that or not.
So one of the questions that was raised when I had the sneak preview by one of the councillors was, this money is actually being spent outside the budget. Mm-hmm. And normally in a budget process, you have scrutiny. We get a vote on it. Nothing of that is happening. It's just being swish of the pen by the mayor and cabinet, and out of nowhere, 3 million it's all like found. Which kind of questions what's the point of the budget, sort of ish. Andrew, what's your take on this? How do you get scrutiny when money is being spent outside the budget process?
Well, so because it's interesting, because we keep asking for money to be spent on certain things, and again we're saying either to come from new homes bonus or civil or section 106. Mm-hmm. And the answer always, no, we've got no money. No, we've got no money. We've got no money. And then suddenly, the £3 million just kind of emerges. And it's a lot of money, and it's mainly one-off. So none of this is sort of really building anything for the long term. And personally, if I had been the mayor, I probably would have just spent all of that money on laptops for children in schools, making sure that the gap was completely filled, because I can't think of anything that would be more useful. And if you bought proper laptops, I've had laptops which last 5 years. Yeah. That could see a secondary pupil through secondary school, and I think that would have a lot more long-term impact than some of this money. Because when I look at the list, I'm not convinced that this is of any value of money. Some of it is, but not all of it.
Well, that was one of the criticisms that was laid in the proposal, that there isn't a big theme, and it's kind of like a scattergun approach. Whereas if you concentrate on a theme, then you'd have an impact on it. And one of the issues is education, especially in a borough with high levels of child poverty. And it would have made more sense to just focus the entire COVID recovery fund on that theme, just to sort of like tackle that issue. Is this going to go to overview and scrutiny, Andrew? And what's the thinking? What were you going to question, and who's presenting it at overview and scrutiny? That's interesting.
Well, it's not going directly to review and scrutiny. So we can ask questions about it. Mm-hmm. What normally happens, so by 10 o'clock on Monday morning, I have to submit questions, and I've got a bunch of questions for cabinet. And normally there's always on the agenda, there's 15 minutes set aside for pre-decision scrutiny of cabinet papers. 30 minutes. But very, very, very rare in overview and scrutiny do we ever actually get the time to do that, any detailed scrutiny of what's going to cabinet. It might happen on Monday, because the agenda is actually pretty light on Monday. But normally we never get the opportunity to look at the detail of cabinet, except to ask those questions in advance. So the reality is that unless Councillor Peter Golds, who sits on cabinet as the leader of the opposition group, sort of asks a question, the odds are is that there would be no real scrutiny of this decision, unless there's a call in. But I don't.
You never know. You never know. The other one that was picked up, and you picked it up on the discussion before the show that we had, is this deep cleaning of markets or street markets, kind of ish. And someone one of the councillors made a point at the preview that we had, is there's much better way of getting values or investing in our markets than just with a high-powered hose just going down, up and down, and just cleaning the pavement. There doesn't seem to be any thinking behind it. Like, how do we get social value into our markets? How do we make them sustainable? That's where the money should be spent, isn't it? Instead of just a one-off deep clean.
Yeah, I mean, there is some other money for businesses. So actually, the largest item is actually £350,000 for business adaptation grants, a business adaptations grants scheme for small and micro Tower Hamlets businesses. But there's no guidance on what does that mean. Is that compensation for lost business? Is it to adapt to COVID? But then businesses have already had to adapt to COVID. So by the time this money is spent, we're kind of hopefully post-COVID. There's also £34,000 for a building and marketing a trader training course and setting up and running a street market business, which is, I guess, kind of useful. But again, I'm not quite clear how that matches the description of a COVID recovery fund. So there's still, I still have a lot of questions about actually how this is going to happen and how it's going to be allocated, and what the benefit will be for residents and for businesses. So
I think what this kind of gives the impression is this is kind of officer led. You kind of like look at it, and it seems like pet projects of council officers.
Yeah.
And it seemed like there wasn't a clear political direction or steer given.
Yeah.
So it's like, hey guys, we've got some money to spend. What would you like the money to be spent? And each department just threw their pet project in, and we ended up with this. Is there any? So once it's finalized, what's the timetable of this money being handed out, and when would it finish? It seems like it's kind of timed perfectly for the next year's elections.
Yes. I'm just looking at that. It's not entirely clear. I know. So the first bit of pot of money I talked about, the sort of the £590,000, that's already been agreed. So that's the bit that will happen first. In terms of this larger £2.4 million pot, some of it will be managed by East End Community Foundation on behalf of the council, but that will take a few months to manage. So reality is, some of this money won't get spent. Well, probably not for another 3, 4, 5 months would be my guess. I mean, some of it can be spent more quickly and some of it might take longer. And again, some of this stuff should have happened like 3 months ago or 6 months ago to actually have a real impact on COVID recovery.
So, Andrew, hypothetical, if you were going to do a call-in on this, what would the main ask be, and what would you like changed on this?
Well, I think, the two arguments would be is that it is a bit of a shotgun approach. It's not clear how a lot of this money actually benefits the wider community, or there doesn't seem to be a lot of detail behind it. So you can make the argument it's not value for money. Or there's another argument, which is, scrap all of that. We want to spend it all on laptops for children. And I kind of worked out you could probably buy, 10,000 laptops for £3 million and decent laptops. So we might not need that money, because I know there's been lots of additional laptops provided by charities and government and all the rest of it. But no, actually, having said that, we were talking about needing 10,000 laptops only a month or two ago. So maybe that's the argument is this is not value for money. Let's spend it on something completely different, like laptops for children.
Cool.
And then sort of see, the arguments pro and con some of those things. But yeah, some of that spending just doesn't make a lot of sense. So
cool. So watch this space, guys. There might be a call-in. It'd be interesting to see who signs that call-in as well. And it'd be interesting to see who presents at the Dragon's Den of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and that'll be interesting. So we're going to go straight into a break. After the break, we're going to look into the council housing program. So we're going to go straight into a break. Hi guys, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Premier with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this section, there's a bit of a fanfare that's going to be sort of like a milestone that we've passed, and that's going to be a part of the cabinet agenda next Wednesday, which is we've built, we've provided up to 1,000 new council homes. Is it? And Andrew, you've been taking a closer look at that number. Have we really built them, or do we just buy them at auction, kind of ish, or a bit of both? And are we going to reach the target of 2,000 now? I think that's what the mayor desired target was. I'm sure in the upcoming election, there's going to be a bit of a bidding war, and I'll be interested to see what numbers are brought up by the prospective candidates. But what's your take on looking at these numbers? How many did we actually build, and how many did we actually had to buy?
So I'll read off the numbers in a second. And one of my concerns has always been is that this has been portrayed as 1,000 new council homes. But as you'll see when I read off the numbers, it's not necessarily all new. So basically, the council believes it will deliver 1,097 council homes, and that's broken down into 521 new builds. So that is definitely brand new council built homes, and I'll read off some of the examples later on. 157 of what's called Section 106 purchases. So that's where, rather than the housing association buying apartments that were built by somebody else, that we have bought them instead. So that doesn't really change the overall number of affordable homes in Tower Hamlets. That just means Tower Hamlets Homes will be the housing association. There's 23 homes for temporary accommodation. Then and this is where it gets a little bit controversial, then there's 147 what are called buybacks. And I think this is basically where we have bought from Poplar Harker older Poplar Harker stock, but there's no detail in the cabinet report as to how much was spent buying those 147. I think it's £53 million, which would imply that the average purchase is £360,000, but I'm not 100% sure of that. And then the last item is 249 property purchases, including out of borough. So what that means is that we bought 249 homes. I don't know where they are, but some of them were out of borough. And the reason for buying out of borough is, in theory, it's cheaper than buying in Tower Hamlets. But there's no detail on that. Where there is detail is on the 521 brand new built homes. So, for example, like in my ward, Mellish Street, 22 new homes. Bancroft and Wickford, 33 new homes. Helwan Square, 33 new homes. Loxley A, Jubilee and Barrett, 77. So basically the 521 homes is not like one big block of 521 or two blocks of 250. It's lots and lots of small, relatively small developments. So the biggest one is 62 homes at Arnold Road. And the total cost of that 521 new homes plus some other bits and pieces is £233 million, they're saying. So I'm sort of working out what that means on a per unit basis, and depending on how you add it up, it could be like around £400,000 per new home is the average cost of that new build. And one of my concerns about this program was related to Croydon, because Croydon went bankrupt because basically they were developing too many small sites and not getting economies of scale. And it might have been more efficient, maybe, and that's why I need to double check, to have, done three big developments. Blackwall Reach, for example, Blackwall Reach, in one development is building probably 3 times as many homes as what's in all of these different sites. And I think there's about 20 of them all together. So it'd be very interesting to kind of compare the value for money from building lots of little homes compared to, expanding a couple of big sites. I'm not saying you can't do both, because you probably need to do both, but the focus very much has been on lots of small sites rather than a couple of big sites.
That's quite a steep cost of, if you've worked out 400, because we're not paying for the land. So in terms of construction, in the UK, in terms of construction, your largest cost is the cost of land. and and the building cost is relatively cheap. Here we're not paying for the land, but it's 251 for 500 units where you don't have to pay for the land. Seems a bit expensive, kind of ish. Has that been apart from this? Has it been picked up in the past, Andrew? Has anyone been looking at this house building program?
I think this is the first time. I think I've seen one thing before, but this is, I think, really the first time since 2017. So back in November 2017, the council agreed to then spend £117 million on the affordable housing programme, which included the Section 106 purchases and buying back from Popular Harker. And I think this is almost the first time that I've seen a lot of detail, both numbers, sites and pounds, since 2017, because I've been on Twitter and a few other places at the council have been sort of saying, what happened to that £117 million? What did we buy? And for the first time, there is some detail on some of it, but on other parts of it, like the Popular Harker stock, there's no detail, and there's no detail about what we bought out of Borough. So again, did we buy one big site or lots of little sites? I have no idea yet. And given, that's a lot of money that we're spending, I think it's quite important that from a scrutiny point of view that we understand it. And my concern has always been the value for money, and are we getting the most number of homes out of the money that's being spent? And that £233 million doesn't include the Popular Harker stock. I think that's another £53 million. I don't think it includes the out of borough. So it's entirely possible we spent between £300 and £400 million. And I don't know the exact number, which I find disturbing given what happened at Croydon, because the reason why Croydon failed is because they ran out of money because they spent so much money on their property program. I'm not saying we're as bad as Croydon, but I'm just simply saying the lack of transparency about where this money has gone is like Croydon.
Well, it seems a bit of steep, because I know Eastern Homes are going to start on their development in my ward, which is, I think, it's over 100 units, and the cost of each unit is less than £100,000. So it seems a bit steep for Tower Hamlets Council. We could have got 3 times as more of we could have hit the 1,000 with that, 200 even more. So where do you think the issues are? Is it because we've gone in-house in terms of building houses, or is it the contractor that we're using, or where are the costs coming in? Because it just seems, if we're not paying for the land, it seems like unless we're making them out of granite and marble, these houses, I just can't figure out where the construction costs are coming in.
Yeah, so there's no detail. So there's basically just 2 pages at the end of this cabinet report. So it's like pages 15 and 16 of the report. And, there's lots of other stuff on the agenda. So you really have to, read everything to spot this. And most of the detail is about how it's funded. So the other interesting thing I didn't really talk about is, so where is this £233 million coming from? Well, some of it is coming from government. So £6.7 million is GLA grant, which is money from government given to the Mayor of London, who then gives it to local authorities. But Newham have always been, they've got £140 million compared to our 6.8 million. 64 million pounds is right to buy receipts. So it's good to see that we're spending this money, because if you don't spend it within a set period, you have to give it back to the Mayor of London. £5 million is Section 106, which I think is money from developers, like Canary Wharf Group. If they don't provide all the affordable housing on site, they'll give you some cash in lieu. And what's also very interesting is £155 million is borrowed. So we're also borrowing £155 million. And obviously we'll have an income stream from the rentals of these properties that will help pay that borrowing back. So that's how we're funding this program, through a mixture of right to buy, government grants, money from developers, and borrowing.
Cool. Are you going to? Is this something that you're going to bring up in audit, Andrew? Because this is this is classic audit issue, which is after the fact, looking backwards, doing a forensic investigation. If so, when? How would you bring it about, and when? So our listeners could watch out for it.
So there is reference to a more detailed report which is being worked on, which I assume is a report that will answer some of the questions that I've got, and apparently it's being pulled together by an external organization whose name I've now forgotten. So it may be that will answer some of the rest of these questions. But what I'm sort of doing is I'm sort of working out the cost per unit, and then, because some of them are really expensive, and I think some of them I can understand because they're adapted housing, and that's always going to be more expensive. So some of this I can understand, but some of this just looks odd. So basically what it will prompt is by 10 o'clock on Monday morning, I need to ask a bunch of questions. And one of the main questions will be is about, the sort of cost per unit. Does seem high. Some of it may be explainable because maybe some of these are larger family-sized homes, but even so, it's still and this is not all costs because it won't include like council overhead costs. So this is not a full charge in terms of the total costs. So that's step one, would be to ask some questions about this. But my personal view is that we would deliver more new homes if we were to use our compulsory purchase powers, and which we've actually done at Blackwall Reach. So Blackwall Reach is we compulsory purchased some of that land so we could assemble a big site. And now at Blackwall Reach, we're building 1,700 new homes. Obviously, there were, I think, 300 homes there originally. So the net increase is 1,400. But, that's a lot more than we're achieving by this kind of. And one of my other concerns is that, with all these 20 different sites, is you spend a lot of time on something which is only 19 units or 4 units. And I would argue it would have been more productive to have done another Blackwall Reach type scheme. And there were a couple of places where we could have done this and then use some of this money to load that up and then, and then to try where we could deliver some of this stuff more cheaply elsewhere.
No, it just seems a bit higgledy-piggledy. And I know when Eastern Homes did the infill program, they hit one estate in one go. So you had the same contractor just moving a bit up the estate. So whereas here, when I spoke to the project team, they were here on Loxley, then they've gone to Jubilee Street, and they're back at Loxley. It's just like all over the place, and dealing with different issues, instead of just hitting it in one go, or having a much more strategic look at it. But it's becoming more and more contentious with community centres now being eyed up. So there's a Canal Club, which is an ongoing campaign by the residents of the Wellington estate to save their community centre. And there's some really interesting articles out there. But just talking to the Stifford Centre as well in Stepney, they apparently that's going to be earmarked for housing, but it seems like we're running out of land as well in terms of this infill program.
Yeah, so within that program, as I didn't say, but there's also some new community centres to be built. So there's £700,000 for a Strahan community centre. There's £3.1 million for the Melly Street community centre in my ward. There's £1.7 million for Bancroft something TMC. I don't know, does that mean community? I'm not entirely sure. And then 700, that's retail, sorry. And then £1.6 million for the St Paul's Way community centre. But I thought we already had a community centre there. Waterloo Gardens, £1.1 million, and then Jill Street community provision, £800,000. So part of this cost are some new community centres, and some of that will be controversial as well in terms of who uses those community centres.
Well, I know Councillor Peter Gold did raise looked at those sites and made it clear that they couldn't be exclusive, they need to be inclusive. So it'd be interesting to see how the council meets the statutory requirements. And it'd be interesting to see if they do, the issue comes up in the forthcoming elections as well, which I'm sure they will. I can see politicians going around promising all sorts of things, including the one on my ward on St. Paul's Way, which I've stepped back, but I've heard all sorts of meetings happening in the middle of the night with different groups. But yeah, further developments to follow. I'll post if anything happens. Listeners here and viewers here would be the first to know about it. So we're going to go straight into a break. After the break, we're going to discuss Spitalfields Community Housing or Spitalfields Housing Association and the merger between One Housing and Riverside, and just generally talk about the state of play of housing associations in Tower Hamlets and further afield. So we're going to go straight into a break now.
Now, there's a lot of conversation around who pays more taxes, if it is the rich or if it is the poor, right? But when you are basically going out and during a day, you go to a restaurant, you have to pay taxes there. You buy a car, you have to pay taxes there. So why is it even a conversation that the rich pay less taxes or the poor pay more taxes? Why is it a conversation like that?
Because it's true, the rich generally pay less tax. A rich person walks into a Tesco's or a Sainsbury's, they're not going to get a different bill than another person, right? They're still going to pay the same VAT on those goods, they're still going to pay the same thing. So that's all the same. However, the differences come in if you can pay yourself from your own company, you can structure it in a way that you pay less income tax through paying a bit of salary, paying dividends and so forth, and then also deferring income. Also, your pension payments or contributions can be different. So that increases your tax sort of gap, if you want to use it that way. Where a PAYE person just gets paid salary and bonus. And now those are the most highly taxed sources of income in the UK, definitely, in the UK. We've seen it, right? If an owner of a large public traded company does something wrong, irrelevant of what that company does or how valuable that company is, the stock generally falls into a pool of nothing, right? Because in a public company where the stock is traded openly on the stock exchange, the value of that stock is driven by supply and demand, it's driven by emotion, it's driven by news, it's driven by quite a lot of variables over and above the actual accounting or total net worth of that company. I mean, we've seen it, right? If an owner of a large public traded company does something wrong, irrelevant of what that company does or how valuable that company is, the stock generally falls into a pool of nothing, right? And the company may still have value, it may still be doing quite a good thing.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Weekly Politics Show. I'm Councillor Premier with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this section, we're going to talk about shenanigans going on in Spitalfields Housing and the merger between Riverside and One Housing and what it means for residents in Tower Hamlets. So the first focus is Spitalfields Housing, which has a very colourful history. I remember speaking to a former housing officer where he described vividly what Chair's action is at the AGM, and that was a practical Chair action, sort of ish. But so moving on. So Spitalfields Housing, it's been sort of like a worry for quite a while. It's known for its turbulent AGMs. It's known for its turbulent sort of like changing of the guard, sort of ish. There's been so many. It's just kind of like a revolving door. And it has an interesting history. It came out of the squatters movement. A lot of the councillors or former councillors sort of like started their activities there in that squatters movement, and they eventually formed their own housing cooperative. So it's basically run as a cooperative where all the tenants, I believe, have a vote so to speak. So, Andrew, worrying developments. The housing office being turned into a chicken and chip shop without any consultation. The latest on social media.
Yes, I mean, I've seen various allegations, and they're just allegations; they're not proven. But what's interesting is actually, despite its name, is that its offices apparently have moved to my ward. So their office now is actually in Canary Wharf, which does support the argument that the original, premises have been turned into a shop. But my understanding, there is some other facility that's open for customer queries, which I think is on their website. But there have been sort of various emails sent into councillors making allegations about the running of the organisation and whether the people running it are fit people to run that organisation. And as I said, there are allegations. I know that they've been sent on to the Housing Ombudsman to look at. I know the Mayor of Tower Hamlets, John Biggs, is aware of them, as are the various cabinet members. And I think it's probably worth quoting what Councillor Mark Francis sort of said a couple of days ago at the Housing Scrutiny Subcommittee. He said it's a housing association that's done really good work in the past, but he was concerned about some of the stuff that he'd heard, as am I, but I don't know that organisation that well. So it's something we're going to follow up on. And I know Councillor Ed Shamhak, who chairs the Housing Scrutiny Subcommittee, he's asked or will ask that housing association to come to our next meeting in September, to present to us about what they're doing and to also answer some questions as well. So hopefully we'll be able to flush out some of those issues over the coming months. But I think, the important thing is, I really like the principle of housing associations being local and being locally run, because we'll talk in a minute about the alternative, which is these really big corporate organizations, which I have concerns about. So I think it's in all of our interests to make sure that these smaller organizations, more local organizations, are well run and provide a good job. And if they don't, unfortunately, that then makes an argument for these organizations to become more corporate, and I think would lose something in the process.
Well, my recollection is that housing associations are very tightly regulated. They get audited, not just, and stress tested as well, and very strict financial stress test, and governance as well is looked at. And then you get rated, and then you got to do improvements, be like an Ofsted school inspection. So that should have been picked up, shouldn't it? The issues in Spitalfields housing. That's kind of worrying to me, that there seems to be issues of governance perpetually when talking to people, but has it been picked up? Have they been rectified? It just seems like something that's been missed by the system, so to speak.
I think part of the problem is that the Housing Ombudsman is very focused on financial stability. So a lot of the governments is related to financial stability. So if you've got a good bank balance and show good reserves and, more money coming in than going out, then, and I don't know this for definite, but I suspect you can escape some of this scrutiny. But I'm also aware of, Tower Hamlets Community Homes had some issues with governance. There was some issues with their reporting, just complete accident. And I know that had a negative impact on them. But I think a lot of that's very kind of tick boxing. And my concern about the Housing Ombudsman, it doesn't really focus on the quality of repairs or the quality of work done for actual residents. So you can do a really bad job on that and still be okay from a governance and financial point of view. I know the sort of new government, I don't remember if it's a white paper or an act of, no, I think it's a white paper. We're talking about trying to sort of gather better statistics on housing association performance. But the problem with that is you can have better statistics, but if you can't change the management, what's the point of having, you can know somebody's performing really badly, but what can you do to change that unless you force a merger or force a change of leadership? And I don't think the Housing Ombudsman does that very often, unfortunately.
Well, that was the intention behind the stock transfers initially. Which is controversial. People have different views on it. But the initial idea was that these entities will be locally accountable. The council was supposed to have some kind of golden share in it, with boards. Some of them have been got rid of. I know Popular Haka got rid of them when some councillors forgot to attend the meeting and it got voted through. apparently. It seems kind of worrying. And then you got the opposite kind of ish with One Housing, which sort of like it's gobbling, it's getting bigger and bigger kind of ish. And now it's sort of like merging with a national, a northern housing provider. And speaking to people who tenants of One Housing, they're not responsive. That's the answer I always get. So and they're the biggest housing provider in the island, Andrew, especially the Barkington estate. That's by One Housing. How do you feel about it? Them getting bigger? Is bigger better? Kind of ish?
Well, so it depends on what your viewpoint is. If your viewpoint is financial stability, economies of scale, the ability to build and develop lots of new homes, generally bigger is better. And in this case, One Housing Group is being taken over, so they'll become a subsidiary of Riverside, which started off in Liverpool. And it's interesting that actually One Housing Group were not going to have those estates in the Isle of Dogs. What happened originally, and I can't remember who it was, the original housing association failed financially, and then they were then forced into a merger with One Housing Group, because at that point, One Housing Group were the bigger, stronger, financially more stable organization. So they took over the estates in the Isle of Dogs. And now One Housing Group has been taken over by I think they're bigger, but certainly they're more financially stable organization. And there's also some arguments in terms of system, IT systems, work better if you're a big organization. But the concern is that, they'll be headquartered in Liverpool, and, how will they manage, estates in Mile End or on the Isle of Dogs? So it's going to be particularly important to make sure there's some kind of local management, because I've had problems with other buildings where, there's a building over here and the management are sort of up in the northwest of London. So by the time they get on the tube to come here and go back, they've wasted almost half a day. So, and that's one of the things. I know that I have some criticisms about Poplar Harker, but one of the things I like about Poplar Harker is that everything is local and it's reasonably short distance from their head office to all of their sites. And that's a model I much prefer. So my concern would be about the kind of day-to-day management of the blocks, which I don't think any housing association do a particularly good job at. And I think the bigger they get, the worse they become.
Well, the Barkingtons, up for estate regeneration. Do you think this merger is going to have an impact on that, Andrew? The direction of that?
No, because I had a meeting earlier today with One Housing Group about another scheme, which is just to the north of the Barkington estate, on sort of Bing Street and Bosun Close. And in that case, what they're planning to do is to kind of sell the land to a developer, but then do a legal agreement that then protects the affordable housing on the site. So in effect, the developer would put up the cash to build this. So they're proposing some minor changes. So the Barkington is not yet faced with regeneration, but there's a scheme to the south at Tiller Road, which is also, so I suspect, I don't think it will make any material difference, because the financial issues that One Housing Group have got will be partially solved by this newer, bigger, better funded organization. So I suspect those developments will go ahead. And it's a good reminder that housing associations are meant to have two jobs. They're meant to do the day-to-day management of existing homes, and they're also meant to build new homes. And they're meant to be the main sort of provider of new homes, except for private developers. And in some areas, they do that job. Certainly Poplar Harker have been building lots of new stuff, and other housing associations are as well. And certainly previously One Housing Group were very property development focused. And that's a difficult job to balance, the day-to-day management to property development, because they're two different skill sets.
Well, it's something to see, and it'd be interesting how we hold them to account, especially when they get bigger and bigger. Well, we're coming to the end of our show. It's going to be an interesting week at the cabinet. There might be a call-in, there might not be a call-in on this mayor's COVID recovery fund. Watch this space. It'd be interesting over scrutiny in cabinet, and we'll inform you of any developments. So thank you again for watching the show. I'm Councillor Premier with co-host Councillor Hybrid. Thank you very much. Have a nice weekend. Thank you. Bye bye.